Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caroline Colas, and I am the Senior Director of Health and Wellness at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Welcome to Getting Personal with Parkinson's, Understanding the Impact of Nutrition on Parkinson's with Dr. Michael Greger. We are bringing you this program from the JCC, and it's part of the Edmund J. Safra Parkinson's Wellness Program, which is supported by New York's largest healthcare provider, Northwell Health. For over 12 years, the JCC has been hosting programs for people living with Parkinson's, and we're excited to be launching this new series. If you're interested in our Parkinson's programming, you can just go to our website at www.mmjccm.org/Parkinson's. We'll put that in the comments section so you can just click on that. I'm excited to be joining you on Facebook today so that we can share stories and put a face to Parkinson's. We want to introduce you to people thriving and living with PD. We also want to speak with some experts and maybe even a celebrity or two. This program is for anyone whose life has been impacted by PD and those who are concerned or want to know more about how people get Parkinson's, how to prevent it, and what to do once you have it. Let's create the show together. Let us know if you want to be a guest or if you have a topic of particular interest that you want us to feature. All inquiries can go to Whitney Chapman at wchapman@mmjccm.org. And now I'm excited to share with you a fast-paced, information-packed conversation I had with Dr. Michael Greger. If you don't know Dr. Greger, you're in for a real treat. He specializes in clinical nutrition and is a New York Times best-selling author of several books, including a book with the odd title, How Not to Die. An internationally recognized speaker on a number of important public health issues, Dr. Greger has been published in numerous medical journals. He presents at numerous conferences, testified before Congress, and was honored with the FACLM Lifestyle Medicine Trailblazer Award. He is a founding member and fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And as you will see in this interview, he is full of helpful information. In fact, I don't think there's a question he can't answer. And his website is nutritionfacts.org. What he's particularly good at is synthesizing all of the research and making it available to people like you and me who are interested in knowing how to sort through the myriad of fact and fiction about nutrition. After this conversation, I will be joined by Lianna, Levine, Reisner from Plant Powered Metro New York, a dear partner and friend of ours here at the JCC. And we'll be here just to answer any questions you have, and we'll elaborate more about how a plant-based diet can support health in those living with Parkinson's. So if you have questions as you listen to our conversation today, please put them in the comments section below. And let me remind everyone that, of course, this information in this conversation and post is not intended or even implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All the content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this website is for general information purposes only. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment before undertaking a new healthcare regime, including a new nutritional health plan. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard in this conversation or read on this website. And now, on with the show. Dr. Greger, it's so exciting to see you and have you on the show. And are you walking on a treadmill?
Of course I'm walking on a treadmill. Sitting's no good for you. Prolonged sitting increases all-cause mortality. And so why not just have a standing desk when you can just throw a cheap treadmill under it? You can buy it at any thrift store, some cheap plastic shelving with some duct tape on a table, and you are ready to rock.
I love it. You know, it's so funny. As the health and wellness director, I don't know why I didn't think of this. I'm on so many Zooms. I could be doing exactly.
You could be walking, and it goes. I've been here. I got an app for my thing, so I've been walking for 5 hours now.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like, it's slow, so you can still type and everything. But, so I've walked 45,000 steps, I mean, and the day's only half over.
Speaking of half over, where are you calling in from?
I am calling you from sunny Seattle, Washington.
Oh, wow. So you are on the West Coast. Well, we so appreciate you being with us today. And I am so curious. Years ago, we started our Parkinson's program. And at that time, there wasn't that much research. It was maybe 12, 14 years ago that we started. There wasn't that much research on exercise even. And of course, we've learned that exercise is really important in delaying progression in Parkinson's disease. And then I remembered thinking, as more and more research came out about nutrition and the impact of diet on just every kind of illness that anyone could possibly think of, I thought, well, there's got to be an impact on what we eat on Parkinson's, both on Parkinson's prevention and also on when somebody has Parkinson's. But I remember talking with various neurologists, and they said, the research just isn't that conclusive. Are we at a different place now where you actually have data that says to us that nutrition does make a difference?
Not only does it make a difference in prevention, we now have research on treating Parkinson's with diet and lifestyle approaches. And so whether or not this has all been, a lot of this research we've known for years. And I think probably the main reason doctors don't know about it is they simply weren't taught about it in medical school. And they're just not staying on top of the research. But I would encourage them to go to nutritionfacts.org, type in Parkinson's, and get all the information they could ever want on prevention and treatment. Although I do have some videos coming up that haven't been released yet. And I have a book on, I have my In How Not to Die, where I go through with 15 chapters in each of the 15 leading causes of death. I talk about Parkinson's because it is one of the leading killers and what we can do about it. And of course, all the proceeds I receive from all my books are all donated directly to charity.
That's amazing. So how does nutrition and diet affect the risk of developing PD?
Well, the most, the 4 risk factors that we've kind of conclusively arrived upon over the last, 2 centuries since, James Parkinson wrote his famous essay. And that is exposure to pesticides. And by exposure to pesticides, we're talking about occupational exposure, not kind of consumer exposure. Consumption of dairy products, that is at a consumer level. Number 3, a history of melanoma for some reason increases one's risk for Parkinson's. And number 4 is traumatic brain injury. So those are the 4 things ideally we want to try to stay away from to reduce our risk of Parkinson's.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's important information, and I love that you made a distinction between sort of the pesticides from actually working with them versus ingesting them as well. How does the gut microbiome differ in a person with PD?
Oh, that's an exciting question. I wonder if I have any videos on that. Let me look really quick. It's so funny. I have so many thousands of videos so far. People ask me, well, tell me about that video where you did, and I'm like, your guess is as good as mine. That's why I do videos. I don't have to worry about this. All right. Oh, here we go. So in Nature, which is the most prestigious scientific journal on the planet Earth in 2021, there was a meta-analysis on Parkinson's disease and the microbiome. Dun, 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 dun. And what did they find? I'm looking at this right now. They find the most consistent microbiome alterations were a so-called dysbiosis, meaning an imbalance of good versus bad bacteria in the gut, resulting in a pro-inflammatory status, a depletion of fiber-producing bacteria. because of the so-called short-chain fatty acids, which are what our good gut bugs make from the fiber and resistant starch we eat. They produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that get absorbed from our colon into our bloodstream, circulate throughout our bodies, up into our brain, have an anti-inflammatory effect. We think that may indeed be playing a role. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean cause and effect, right? Maybe a gut dysbiosis, not eating enough fiber. And by fiber, we're talking about all whole plant foods, not talking about fiber supplements like Metamucil, which don't work because they're non-fermentable fiber, meaning it can help with bowel movements, but our good gut bacteria can't actually eat psyllium, can't actually eat Metamucil. So we're talking about whole plant foods. Processed foods have little or no fiber. Animal foods have, like meat, eggs, dairy, have zero fiber. But the most of the fiber, all whole plant foods have it, but most of the fiber are concentrated in the drier foods. People think, well, I eat lots of fruits and vegetables, I don't have to worry about fiber. Fruits and vegetables are 80 to 90% water. To get to really reach the kind of the 50 grams of fiber we want to shoot for every day, we need to eat some of the drier whole plant foods. Talking about whole grains, particularly intact whole grains, as well as legumes, which are beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils. So we should be eating our hummus at every opportunity, and that will foster the growth of these good short-chain fatty acid producing bacteria, fiber-eating bugs. Now, so is it that the dysbiosis by inadequate fiber intake leading to Parkinson's, or do Parkinson's patients, for whatever reason, eat less healthfully and develop this dysbiosis? That is a question that has yet to be answered.
And let's go back a little bit and just explain for our listeners who might not know what the microbiome is.
Oh, so yeah, the microbiome is the trillions, literally trillions of bacteria in our gut. We actually have more bacteria in our gut than cells in our body. And so of all the cells that make up our body, most are not human. And there's about 100 times more DNA in our gut microbiome than in the whole rest of our body. And we used to just think our microbiome was important for something like inflammatory bowel disease. But now we know that our gut microbiome, the kinds of bacteria we have in our gut, actually play a role in psychiatric illness, immune defense, autoimmune diseases, inflammation generally, play a role in fatty liver disease, on down the list. So it's important to keep our good gut bugs happy. How do we do that? By eating prebiotics, meaning eating what our good bugs eat. That's fiber-resistant starch, concentrated whole grains and legumes.
Wow. So talk a little bit more about fiber. So in a way, the fiber, when we eat it, we're actually feeding the bugs in our system, correct?
Right. We're feeding a particular select subpopulation. We're feeding the good ones. We're feeding the ones we want to be fed. So, for example, bifidobacteria, you often see it in probiotics, the so-called good bugs. Well, I mean, you have those good bugs down there rather than taking pills of the good bugs and then just letting them starve to death in your gut. How about feeding the ones you already have so they're fruitful and they multiply? And then you can keep them thriving by eating more fiber-rich foods. And that's how we do it. In fact, there's one particularly fiber-rich food that may be particularly helpful for Parkinson's patients, and that's fava beans.
Why is that?
Fava beans are where, so everyone who has Parkinson's knows of L-Dopa, Cinemet, which is the kind of the primary
Standard
treatment. And guess where it was discovered? 1913. It was discovered, the miracle drug L-Dopa was discovered in fava beans, or also known as broad beans. And in fact, you can give Parkinson's patients 1 1/3 cups of cooked fava beans in the next 4 hours. Substantial clinical improvements have been found. In fact, similar to the improvement you get taking L-Dopa cardopa, a Cinemet dose. In fact, they work so well, you have to be careful about abruptly stopping them, just like you have to be concerned about abruptly stopping Parkinson's meds because of something called neuroleptic malignant syndrome. Fava beans have so much L-Dopa that it's you have to maintain a kind of a steady dose of them. And turns out other beans also have it. Just regular beans, though in lower amounts. You can, feed people soybeans on top of their Parkinson's meds. In fact, just 1.5 spoonfuls of roasted soybeans, the soy nuts, led to a significant improvement over drugs alone in Parkinson's patients in terms of involuntary movements over the subsequent few hours. A spoonful and a half. That's how powerful some of these foods can be. So of all foods to eat, fiber-rich foods are good sources. And of all fiber-rich foods, legumes are the most fiber-rich. And of all legumes, check out fava beans.
Awesome. I know that constipation is one of the challenges also with Parkinson's.
Oh, so yeah, there's the side benefit right there.
Right. So it seems like that can be, a double whammy. You can have both at the same time. By having more fiber in your diet, you can help improve your microbiome and constipation as well.
It's actually that's one of the reasons why scientists have looked to the microbiome in Parkinson's, because people who down the road develop Parkinson's are noted to have constipation 10, 20 years before they get diagnosed with Parkinson's. And so that would suggest perhaps constipation, or the diet that would lead to constipation, may be a risk factor for Parkinson's, or maybe constipation is an early symptom of Parkinson's, as in 10 to 20 years before you actually come down with the disease, early symptom. But there is certainly a critical connection there.
Wow. And would you say that PD might be an autoimmune disease? That most diseases that fall into that category involve inflammation, and that inflammation may also be chronic with PD?
So PD is caused by anything that destroys these so-called dopaminergic neurons. There are neurons in your brain, in a specific region of your brain, that produce dopamine. Anything that kills that brain, that kills that part of the brain, kills those nerve cells, whether it's an autoimmune process or a traumatic brain injury or certain chemicals. Anything that does it can lead to a dopamine deficiency state, which manifests itself as Parkinson's disease.
Gotcha. Do we assume that an anti-inflammatory diet might be the way to go?
So certainly an anti-inflammatory diet is helpful for a variety of other reasons. So inflammation plays an underlying role in many of our chronic diseases, such as diabetes and heart disease. And so eating an anti-inflammatory diet is important for everyone. An anti-inflammatory diet is basically synonymous with a diet centered around whole plant foods.
Gotcha. And maybe we answered this, but how do food choices affect the symptoms and progression of the disease?
There are certain foods and food components that can make things better. Trying to think if there's others that can make things worse. So for example, the reason that smoking is protective of Parkinson's, the tobacco industry likes to talk about how there are certain diseases tobacco is actually good for you. One of which is for example, ulcerative colitis. Smoking, it's so good at crippling your immune system, that if you have an autoimmune disease like inflammatory bowel disease, that's how smoking can actually help. But the way that the smoking helps prevent Parkinson's is through nicotine. In fact, there are studies using nicotine gum for Parkinson's patients. But of course, the problem with smoking is that you die a horrible death, drowning in lung cancer. So how do you get the benefits without the risk? Well, nicotine is found naturally in nightshade vegetables like tobacco leaves, tobacco plants. Well, there are other nightshade vegetables like tomatoes and bell peppers and potatoes. And they also produce nicotine, and in fact, enough nicotine to potentially actually make a difference, although concentrated probably bell peppers probably have enough. But the people who eat more bell peppers actually have lower rates of Parkinson's disease. And we think it's because it's just enough nicotine to actually help prevent the disease.
Wow. So bell peppers are one of the best foods for people with PD to either slow or stop
No,
progression.
they're the best to prevent.
Prevent.
The best
Okay.
food for treating would be fava beans.
Okay. Now, malnourishment is a common problem for people with PD. How can a patient combat that?
Well, they can eat a diet that's high in nutrient density, meaning more nutrients per spoonful, per cup, per calorie. And so you don't want to waste. You only have 2,000 calories in the calorie bank every day. You don't want to waste it on junk that's had the nutrition stripped from it. So you want to focus on the healthiest foods out there. And so that's, beans, greens, berries, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. And I understand that dietary patterns with a high intake of fruit, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nut, fish, and a low intake of saturated fat and a moderate intake of alcohol may protect against PD. Tell us a little bit about how mostly, we've talked about this, a whole food plant-based diet can literally change a PD patient's life. Can it really alter it that much?
Well, we're concerned about the fish consumption because of the pollutants. I know if we could have a time machine to go back before the Industrial Revolution, that'd be one thing. But the highest levels of these toxic pollutants, these persistent pollutants like dioxins and PCBs, toxic heavy metals like mercury, et cetera, are in the aquatic food chain. All the, basically, our oceans are humanity's sewers. Everything, all the mercury from all the coal plants in China eventually settles into our waterways. And so it's the highest levels of, banned pesticides like, hexachlorobenzene or whatever. So that's why we actually think dairy products are associated with consistently associated with increased risk of Parkinson's disease, is because of these pollutants that build up the food chain and get stored in the animal fat. And so ideally we should eat as low on the food chain as possible. So that would be a diet centered around whole plant foods.
Gotcha. And do flavonoid-rich foods like tea, berry fruits, apples, red wine, and orange juice have any impact on Parkinson's?
Certainly they do in animal models of Parkinson's disease, and in vitro models, in terms of kind of looking at nerve or nerve-like cells in a petri dish. Then you see the benefits of flavonoids like quercetin and ficedin found in strawberries and apples and onions. So you can see epidemiological studies that suggest that higher berry consumption lowers one's risk of Parkinson's disease, but it's never actually been, it's only been put to test once in the peer-reviewed medical literature, and that was just a case report of someone going on basically on a strawberry-rich whole food plant-based diet and seeing significant clinical improvement. But a case report is really just kind of a glorified anecdote. We don't we need better studies to put it to the test more fully.
Great. And what about coffee? Should we be drinking coffee or green tea if we have PD?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So caffeine seemed to be so effective in controlling PD symptoms that drug companies were actually coming up with caffeine, tweaking the caffeine molecule so they could patent some kind of, tweaked caffeine to actually put it into a drug, because you can't make any money, Starbucks can make a lot of money selling coffee, but you just can't patent it. You can't, make $1 billion blockbuster drug with something, with a natural component like caffeine. But one would presume, just because we have more data, that caffeine would be safer than some kind of caffeine-like molecule. And so in How Not to Die, in my chapter on Parkinson's, I actually talk about the benefits of coffee, because you can randomize people to coffee or kind of placebo coffee and actually see significant benefits in the caffeinated coffee group. Unfortunately, those were all short-term studies. So I believe 6 weeks was the study. So in 6 weeks, you see a tremendous benefit with caffeine in terms of Parkinson's disease symptoms. And so that's that. But unfortunately, when you actually follow through, I believe that it was 6 months, the effects disappear. Your body becomes kind of habituated to the caffeine. So you take people who are caffeine naive, who don't drink coffee with Parkinson's, give them coffee and they feel so much better, which is awesome. And you're like, woohoo, that was easy, or green tea or anything with caffeine. But then within a few months, actually, the benefits start dropping off. And so you drink all the caffeine and then you end up feeling just as you did before you started the caffeine. So if you want some temporary relief for a couple of weeks, great. But unfortunately, it's not the kind of long-term solution we were hoping for.
Great. And let's talk about dairy a bit and go into it a little bit deeper. Could you specifically address dairy in a PD diet? If dairy is thought to have pesticides, would organic dairy products eliminate pesticides, thereby rendering dairy safe to consume? And what about kefir, specifically since it's supposed to help your digestive system?
Yeah, so we're not exactly sure why dairy consumption is consistently associated with increased risk of Parkinson's disease. It may be the pesticides, in which case, organic dairy would presumably have lower levels. But it may be the galactose. So milk sugar, lactose is made out of a combination of galactose and glucose. And when we eat dairy foods, the galactose is released. And that's actually how you kind of create Parkinson's in a laboratory setting in laboratory animals. To study Parkinson's, you basically give them galactose. And so you can kind of mimic those symptoms. And so that may be why, for example, this big study in Sweden found increased rates of like all-cause mortality. People live shorter lives and more glasses of milk they drank, but they did not see that effect with fermented dairy, like something with presumably something like kefir, because the fermentation process actually cuts down on the lactose. And so if it is the galactose, then fermented dairy products should be better. If it is in the pesticides, then organic should be better. There's also another hypothesis. It's actually lowering uric acid levels in the blood. Dairy consistently does that, but uric acid is actually an antioxidant in the body. It actually protects against Parkinson's. So by lowering uric acid levels, that's actually a bad thing, unless you have something like gout. So there's all sorts of different theories. What we do know is there remains this consistent association regardless of the mechanism. So I would encourage people to just switch over to any of the other milks out there. Probably the healthiest would be an unsweetened soy milk, but there's a whole plethora of new milks to choose from. And I'd encourage people to experiment, find one they like, and move away from dairy milk, both to before and after a Parkinson's disease diagnosis.
Let's talk about meat. If it's organic, does that help at all? Do all proteins interfere with Cinemet? Beans, rice, meat, everything?
Well, so right, so they're interfering with the kind of the
Absorption.
kind of right, the access to the brain, kind of through the blood-brain barrier, and that would happen with any high protein food. And so, and so that's actually a benefit to plant-based eating, is it tends to be lower overall protein intake, but still actually more than half the estimated average requirement. You only need 0.8 grams per healthy kilograms body weight a day, so you want to be on the low side. And when you do eat protein-rich foods, when do you eat them? You eat them at night. Right? You shift your protein intake to the night, because then when it causes you symptoms, you're sleeping. So when it interferes with the protein, interferes with motor function, it's at a time when you're less worried about it. So a protein shifted plant-based diet, so eating those beans at night, and then the context of plant-based diets in general would be the way to do it.
Gotcha. And what we've talked about it a little bit, but let's just reiterate for everybody. What foods should people with PD stay away from, and why?
So I encourage people to stay away from meat, eggs, dairy, and junk. Maximize their intake of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, beans, peas, chickpeas, and lentils. Nuts and seeds, mushrooms, herbs, and spices, basically real food that grows out of the ground. These are our healthiest choices for those with Parkinson's, as well as those without Parkinson's.
Excellent. And what foods have we listed? All of them can interact negatively with PD medications? Is it just protein, or are there others?
Well, I mean, that's the key concern. But yeah, so it's just kind of a protein redistribution diet can help with that.
Okay, and is there such a thing as good and bad sugars for people living with PD? Is sugar a hard thing to work with? Raw honey, processed cane sugar, is that something to be on the lookout for?
Sugar is bad for everybody, independent of their Parkinson status.
And that's because of the effect on the microbiome or the
Oh,
inflammatory
oh, all
nature of
sorts of has all sorts of impacts. So excess sugar intake can increase your risk of fatty liver disease, increase your risk of high blood pressure, which is the leading killer, increase your risk of triglycerides, increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. All sorts of reasons why we want to cut down on added sugars in our diet.
Awesome. Let's take some time to delve into different types of diets for a minute because there's a lot out there, right? And what do you think of something called the keto clean diet?
Never heard of it.
Okay.
But
I mean,
I mean, a keto diet would be a terrible diet, but I don't know what makes it clean. I don't know if you're like eat a keto diet and dish soap or something. I'm not sure
I
what.
think that's the keto diet without any junk food.
Oh, well, I mean, how could it? Yeah. Well, any diet without junk food is better diet than with junk food, but the ketogenic diet would be a terrible diet. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reason it's so popular right now because people tend to lose weight on it. And then people get excited about that. But why is it so detrimental? Is it the risk of cardiovascular disease with keto?
The goal of weight loss is not to fit into a skinnier casket. I mean, so
Good point.
right. I mean, so lower carb eating associated with increased all-cause mortality. Those that go on low-carb diets, on average, live shorter lifespans. It's primarily cardiovascular disease, but can increase your risk of whole slew of issues.
Gotcha. Now, I know that there's been a lot of studies around the Mediterranean diet, and sort of that seems to be the standard one that's recommended for people living with PD. Why is that?
It's packed with vegetables. That's great. I'm down. I mean, we could still make it better. We could get rid of the white bread and the alcohol and the excess sodium. But yeah, no, fantastic. Any diet that includes lots of greens, sign me up.
And what about olive oil?
Oh, well, I mean, the problem is it's high in caloric density. So it's about 120 calories per tablespoon. Boy, for 120 calories, you can get a mountain of nutrition. You can eat cups of blackberries. You can eat all sorts of other things. And so, again, you only have about 2,000 calories in a day. You don't want to waste it. And so we want to get as much nutrition per calorie as possible, and oils would be on the far extreme in terms of low nutrient density. Though if you are going to use an oil, extra virgin olive oil would be the best.
Excellent. And these are some questions from our audience that are living with PD. Years ago, there was a book that came out about aging and the blue zones.
Ah.
What role did nutrition play in the life of those centenarians?
Oh, yeah, very exciting. Well, so that's I'm currently working on how not to age, on longevity, and have a chapter on each of the blue zones, and talking about what is it about these disparate populations where they have, for example, the largest percentage of centenarians, people live to age 100 or more. And the commonality diet-wise is that they're all eating generally plant-based diets with a plant protein, a legume, as the key protein in their diet, whether it's soy in Okinawa, or white beans in the Mediterranean, or black beans in Costa Rica. But yeah, the longest living formerly studied population in the world, Loma Linda, Seventh-day Adventist vegetarians, don't eat any meat at all. Okinawans, about 97% plant-based diet. Actually, mostly sweet potato, actually, of all things. But yeah, so plant-based in general, beans at the center, some kind of legume. Yeah, that's and then yeah, they all have their own kind of idiosyncrasies, but that's what their commonalities are.
Thank you. Here's another question from one of our
Unfortunately, I
listeners.
have to run off to another interview
Oh, okay.
now, but
Well, thank you
thank you
so
so much. I
much.
had a blast. Looking very much
Thank you,
forward to
Dr.
getting
Greger.
up there and speaking not too far in the future in person.
Thank you again. Take care. Wow, wasn't that interview packed with a lot of information? It's overwhelming in some ways. Um, I don't know if we have any questions on the Facebook page. We're going to check that right now. If you want to ask us some questions, please put those in there. And right now, I'm going to bring on the show Lianna Levine Reisner, who introduced me to Dr. Greger. Lianna is the founder of Plant Powered Metro New York, which empowers people to find better health and overcome chronic disease with whole food, fiber rich, plant based nutrition. And she holds a certificate in plant based nutrition from the T. Colin Campbell Institute for Nutrition Studies and eCornell. So, welcome to the show, Lianna. Thanks for being on today. Any comments that you have just from watching Dr. Greger and talk about food and the impact of what our diet is on Parkinson's?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here, Caroline. Yes, I mean, first of all, Dr. Greger lays out so much science. Sometimes you can get a little stuck in it and wonder, what can I do with this? How can I really take action on it? And so I think the easiest way for me to sort of build off of what he's laid out is to say, hey, it's actually not as hard as it sounds. And the thing that I like to talk about when we emphasize a plant-rich diet, a fiber-rich diet, is to just say, hey, what can you do with every single meal that will increase its fiber content, increase its whole plant content, and decrease processed foods and animal foods? So, we can go breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There are so many ways to approach it. Often a lot of folks who want a really hearty, satisfying breakfast will have oatmeal, but not just oatmeal. Throw in all of your berries, throw in flax seeds or chia seeds, which are really good for fighting inflammation. Throw in, other kinds of spices, things that are anti-inflammatory. Some people like a more savory oatmeal with turmeric. Some people like it sweeter with some cinnamon. And moving on to other meals, there are ways to sort of swap here and there. I think nowadays most people are familiar with many ways that there can be sort of a one-for-one swap with dairy products and plant-based milk or dairy products that are meant to replace them, whether it's soy milk or an oat milk or a hazelnut milk in your coffee instead of the dairy milk. But you can do the same thing with even with cheeses and with making all of the sauces that go along with the meals that we have. I think one of the most critical ways that we enjoy plants even more is to find wonderful sauce and dip recipes that allow us to, take in more broccoli, take in more greens, and beans are really so hearty as well.
Wonderful. So I love this idea of, the medication cycles with someone with PD are oftentimes they can be taking medication 5 times a day, right? So having some food and spacing out the food, and I know Rhoda Khan was talking about this when she was on the show, is just that there is a pacing to it, that she really has to plan her day, and that can impact her energy. And I know that some people feel that they eat there's a whole question around protein and maintaining your energy on a plant-based, fiber-rich diet. Many people believe that eating meat protein helps them maintain their blood sugar and their energy. But in fact, it does, especially for somebody living with Parkinson's, it does impact the absorption of their medication. How can we do a substitute there for something that maintains energy using a fiber-rich or plant-based food?
Excellent question. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people, we feel the sense of satiation from high protein meals. But in effect, it's actually the fat content in those meals that makes us feel full, because we're getting so many calories all at once. And the beautiful thing is, if you're shifting toward a lower fat diet, which is going to be helpful for many different forms of disease, and emphasizing the plant-rich foods, the key to making it satiating is actually to go for the starchier carbs. And so those foods are your grains, whole grains in particular. The whole grains are going to be more satisfying and more disease preventing. And also to go for legumes, if you can digest them well, which we can talk about that in a moment. But there's also some wonderful, vegetables, tubers, we'll call them, that are starchier and very satisfying and completely health promoting. Those are potatoes and different root vegetables like sweet potatoes, and there's actually, parsnips and carrots. All of these things have much higher calorie density in the plant kingdom, and they're really key for finding satiation. And so I think if we go back to the question of how do you maintain your energy, the brain is fueled by carbs. It's really the primary ingester of carbs. It needs it to function, and we feel better, we have a happier mood, and we also feel more energy when we're properly feeding our brain. So we notice, as we do our education in the field on plant-based eating, so many people are recognizing that when they shift toward a mostly plant-based diet, they feel so much more energy than they ever have before, because all those healthy carbohydrates are actually flooding the body with the proper fuel that we need in order to make things work well, and that keeps our energy up. So yes, there are some of us who eat a plant-based diet who feel like we need to eat more frequently in order to maintain our energy. But if you're eating nice, well-balanced meals that have a good amount of the healthy starches in them, as well as those like lower calorie density vegetables and fruits, it can do a lot. The other thing that I'll say is fruit itself can be higher density. There are bananas and apples and pears and melons of various sorts that are higher in calories. And you just have to learn how to eat them in higher quantity to really benefit from the energy boost that they give us.
Wonderful. And the reason we're talking, of course, about plant-based diet is that the meat protein just doesn't have any fiber in it. And since we're talking about the gut and the microbiome as maybe a source of both prevention and health enhancing, we want to look at what can we do to enhance that environment in the digestive tract. And we know that fiber does that, and plant foods and complex carbohydrates do that as well. One of the things that I think people don't realize is if we do eat junk food, or too many simple carbohydrates, that actually is detrimental to the microbiome. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting because when we look at all of the ingredients that are in packaged foods, processed foods, in most cases, we're eating just a plant fragment. So we're eating maybe the protein from the plant in the case of a soy protein isolate that you might find in a mock meat, for example. Or we're eating just the starchy part of the rice and not the whole rice when we're eating white rice versus brown rice. And so what we're always trying to do when we're eating plant-rich foods is to find, those whole foods. They can still be packaged and processed, but much more lightly than what we find in most packaged foods. So it's often the case that the fiber in particular has been stripped away from these foods, even in cane sugar. I mean, cane sugar itself comes from the sugarcane plants. And the sugarcane plant, like every other plant, has lots of different components to it. But when we just take the simple sugar out of it and give ourselves, what we call table sugar or white sugar, that's really where the problems fall. The body wants to take its time absorbing these foods. And when we take away the food to its smallest component, even the fat from the food, in the case of oils, our body processes it differently. And in the case of sugar, it goes through us quickly. It spikes blood sugar. In the case of fat, it contributes to poor artery health and many other issues. So in all of these cases, when we look at what's in our diet, we want to try to focus on the whole food, even when we are processing it, hopefully not too much.
Yeah, awesome. And one final question. I wonder if there's any questions at the chat. And we also have Miriam Bram here, and Miriam is going to tell us a little bit about the World Parkinson's Congress. But if Miriam wants to turn her camera on and ask a question, you've heard Dr. Greger and also Lianna. Do you have any thoughts for yourself as you look at this? Anything? I think it's also really important that to start simple. I think that one of the things that we talk about when Lianna and I partner, it's like pick one of these things and add them, even just adding more fiber into your diet. And I do want to talk about the fava beans because certain Ashkenazi, I don't think Sephardic Jews, I think it is, certain parts of the population do not digest well. And can you talk about that a little bit, Lianna? And then Miriam, I want to come to you.
Absolutely. Yes. And it is definitely the case that many of us have challenges digesting beans. There's a reason why people joke about beans to begin with. What we often help people to understand is that you can eat beans if you build up some tolerance in your microbiome, which means that you feed yourself a little bit at a time and grow that amount over time so that you are building the proper gut bacteria to be able to digest it. And it may take a few weeks, it may take a few months. If you're still finding that you're having trouble digesting beans, try to keep your bean content lower. And there are other sources of healthy plant protein in whole grains and even in some of our vegetables as well. Specifically, green leafy vegetables have wonderful proteins that our body can really assimilate very well. But when it comes to the fava bean, there isn't a great replacement. There is one other bean, the velvet bean, which there are a few varieties of, which also have the compound in it that Dr. Greger was talking about, but it seems to be at a lower amount. But I would just say don't avoid beans completely. Try to incorporate them into your diet in a small way so that they're present and not bothersome to your gut.
Right. And I know that Suzette Shamoun, who was on last week, was telling me that her husband does have a particular, the protein where he is missing that and he cannot digest them. So as always, we suggest that Parkinson's is so individual. When you're thinking about changing your diet, when you're thinking about changing something, do consult with your medical professionals because you want to make sure that it's going to work for you. And now to you, Miriam, any thoughts or questions you have for us?
I learned a lot. That was a great session. And your comments, Lianna, were really helpful as well. And I think of myself as pretty educated, but I always learn so much that I didn't know. But my one question for you is about healthy fats. You mentioned eating a low-fat diet. What about the benefits of healthy fats and where would you recommend getting it from?
Absolutely. When we speak about healthy fats, we are often talking about two different things in the plant-based nutrition. One of them is eating whole foods with healthy fats. So avocados in particular, instead of avocado oil, the olives instead of the olive oil, nuts and seeds instead of the butters, or instead of sesame oil, for example. So you can always find a whole food source of these fats that are health promoting. The other thing that's really important to call out specifically is the omega-3 fatty acids that are higher in seeds. So just for our listeners who might be unaware, omega-3 fatty acids are our essential fatty acids, meaning we need to eat them from our diet and we cannot produce them ourselves in our bodies. So that is chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, and in certain cases, walnuts are sort of much higher in these omega-3 fatty acids. And so we always try to incorporate into a healthy plant-based diet a nice amount of those foods, usually about a tablespoon of those foods. But if you have chronic disease, there are circumstances in which having up to half a cup of those seeds in your diet per day is important. And you can include them in many ways. You can put them in smoothies. That's one of the easiest ways to eat them. But you can also incorporate flax and chia into baking because they replace eggs very well. You can do 1 tablespoon of flax or chia mixed with 3 tablespoons of water, and it sort of has the feel and consistency of 1 egg. So those are just ways that we try to help people incorporate healthy fats in.
That's great. I have one question about the seeds, the chia and so forth. Do you recommend having them whole or crushing them?
Great question. Actually, Dr. Greger has made some wonderful videos about this. It's better to grind them. So if you can either buy them ground already, or you can grind them in a magic bullet or some kind of small blender that you have. And that will increase the absorption of those healthy fats. Again, you're not extracting the oil as fat from it, but you're eating it along with the seed just ground up.
If you put them whole in a smoothie, does that take care of the grinding?
That's a good question. It depends on the power of your smoothie. I would actually put them in first and grind them first and then add the smoothie in. That might help. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a great question. And then Miriam, I think that you have an announcement for us next week, everybody. Due to the Jewish holiday, we will be taking our Shavuot holiday. We'll be taking the time off, but it's a perfect reason to attend the World Parkinson's Congress. And so save the date for also May 25th, because we're going to be hosting our annual Gonzalez Ramos Parkinson's Wellness Education Symposium online, Tuesday from 5 to 7 p.m. But can you tell us a little bit about, Miriam, about the World Parkinson's Congress?
Yes, this is in fact the first ever virtual World Parkinson's Congress, and it starts Monday, May 17th, all the way through the 21st. It's called Advancing Science, Care, and Living with PD. Registration is open, I think, till Friday, and it's $25. But for that fee, you get 20 pre-taped sessions that you can listen to on your own time. They're available at noon each day, and then you can follow it up with Q&A, a question on the chat. And then the next day, 23 hours later, they'll have live Q&A panels based on those chat questions. There's also going to be a wellness talk series, and it's really a way for people to get updates and learn from the top scientists, also treatment options, comprehensive care, and living well with PD. So there's actually some people with Parkinson's, like advocates, that will be telling their stories and offering recommendations. So it's going to be really chock full of lots of great information, and is sort of in between the years when they do the live congresses, which the next one will be in Barcelona next June 2022. So Caroline, are you able to post the link?
Yes, we can put that in the comments section. And so folks, you can just click on that and go to that and register for that. And thank you, everyone, Miriam and Lianna and Dr. Greger and Whitney and Matt, all of those that have behind the scenes, for coming on the show today. I thought it was, just the beginning of some really important information on nutrition. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And I just want to remind everybody that, of course, everything, the information in this conversation and this post is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All of the content contained in this segment is for general information purposes only. And remember, always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your medical condition or treatment before undertaking anything new, all right? Never disregard your medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard in this conversation or gotten excited about. Please take care of yourselves, right? First and foremost. Thank you for being on the show, everybody. And
Thank you.
Have an amazing, amazing day. And we'll see you on, when is our next show? 2 weeks, Monday, May 24th. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.